Welcome back to another one of our videos. Today we wanted to talk to you about probably the most important principle in investing, and that is the principle of diversification. There is a saying, there is no free lunch on Wall Street, meaning that in order to have a higher expected rate of return, you need to take on more risk. We are going to show that the only free lunch actually available on Wall Street is the principle of diversification. First, we wanted to explain what is diversification. As the name implies, diversification means that you do not only hold one stock and you do not only hold one particular sector. For example, you might have 30 technology stocks. That does not mean that you are well diversified because you are simply exposed to the technology sector. Buying securities only in the United States also probably means that you are not well diversified. Even though the US market is the biggest one in the world, there are several markets outside of the United States in areas like Japan, Europe, Latin America, for example. In order to be properly diversified, you not only need broad exposure in the domestic market, but you also need broad exposure in the international market in order to form a well-diversified, complete portfolio. Now, why is diversification so important? Why do I have to be diversified across different sectors, across different countries? The underlying principle about diversification is correlation. That is how assets move in tandem or in opposite directions in a portfolio. You need things in your portfolio that are zigging while other things in your portfolio are zagging. If you are able to create such a portfolio, you are going to be able to reduce tremendously the risk of your portfolio while keeping the expected return the same. In other words, you are going to be able to increase your return to risk ratio. This principle of maximizing the return to risk ratio is known as the Holy Grail of investing, and it's a term that was coined by a very well-known investor, Ray Dalio, which we follow closely. We are now going to go over a diagram which explains the Holy Grail of investing. As you can see, this diagram explains the Holy Grail of investing. On the x-axis, or at the bottom of the diagram, we have the number of assets that an investor is going to have in their portfolio. On the y-axis, we have the standard deviation of the portfolio. In other words, the riskiness of a portfolio. So according to this diagram, if we have one asset in our portfolio, the riskiness of our portfolio is going to be 10%. Dalio assumes that the expected return on this asset is also going to be 10%. Now, what the red lines represent is how the riskiness of the portfolio changes under different correlations of assets, assuming that the amount of securities in the portfolio are going to increase. The most important thing from this diagram is as we increase the amount of securities in our portfolio, as we go from left to right in the diagram, and as the correlation between the securities reduces, what we are able to see is that the overall riskiness of the portfolio is decreasing. So for example, if the assets in the portfolio have a 0.2 or 20% correlation and we hold 15 assets in the portfolio, we are able to see that the riskiness of our portfolio falls from 10% to 5%, i.e. we have reduced our risk by 50% simply by diversifying while keeping the expected return the same. So if you look on the right hand side, you are able to see that the return to risk ratio doubles from 0.25 to 0.5 simply because we have added more assets into the portfolio, and these assets do not move perfectly in tandem. The most extreme scenario is when we have 15 assets in our portfolio and these assets have a zero correlation. What happens then is that the riskiness of the portfolio falls to 2%. And as a result, the return to risk ratio increases by a factor of 5 from 0.25 to 1.25. In other words, we are able to increase our return to risk ratio simply by placing more uncorrelated assets into our portfolio. That is the holy grail of investing. The most right-hand side of this diagram shows you the probability of losing money. When you have 15 assets in the portfolio that are not correlated, as you can see, the probability of losing money falls from 40% to 11%. And one of the most important lessons in investing is not to lose money. Buffett famously once stated that what are his most important 3 reasons of investing? The number 1, he said, was never to lose money. Number 2, never to lose money. And number 3, never to lose money. So as we can see in this diagram, there is a massive increase or 5-fold increase in the return to risk ratio, which leads to a reduction in the probability of losing money. Now, many people in investing think that the most important thing in investing is to pick winning securities, securities that are going to outperform the S&P 500. Yes, that is important, but that is probably not the most important thing, and that is also not humanly possible. In the example that I have just now illustrated, you would have to keep picking securities that are 5 times as successful in order to beat the S&P 500, and not only to do that once, but you would have to do that on a continuous basis. As illustrated by Ray Dalio, if you have a well-diversified portfolio that has several 15 to 20 uncorrelated assets, you are able to create a golden goose. You are able to create a portfolio that has 5 times higher the return to risk ratio versus a standard portfolio. At AMP Consulting Group, we engineer portfolios that have multiple components that result in a well-diversified portfolio, optimizing the return to risk ratio. If you would like to find out more, please email us at info@advisormanageportfolios.com. Please also subscribe to our videos, like this video, and we look forward to educating you further in our future videos.